Okay, my name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Museum. Today's date is 29 March 2019, and I am in Chantilly, Virginia, conducting an interview with Rex Latham. Sir, if you could state your name, where you were born, and what year.
My name is Rex Hauser Latham. I was born in Linden, Texas, small East Texas farming community.
And what war did you participate in?
The Vietnam War.
And what branch of the service?
U.S. Army.
U.S. Army, okay. What year did you enlist? What were you doing?
Actually, I was commissioned in May of 1965
Okay.
from University of Texas at Arlington ROTC program.
Okay. Did you have any other family members that were members of the military at all?
Yes. My older brother, who was a career officer,
Okay.
I was commissioned a distinguished military graduate and given a regular commission also.
Okay.
And then a bunch of nieces and nephews and cousins and others that have served in the military. And our father was an enlisted man in the Navy in World War I.
Okay. So what prompted you to join the service?
A sense of patriotism, the model, if you will, of my older brother, who is 15 years older than I am. He's the oldest, I'm the youngest.
Okay.
And I have a large family, and I just liked that career and thought I would be very good at it, so I took military science when I was in college and went in expecting to make it a career.
Okay. Did I'm sure you knew about the Vietnam War before you were commissioned. Did that impact your decision at all? Do you ever think maybe I don't want to do this now, or did that ever?
No. When I was in college, the emphasis I was in college from 1961 to 65.
Okay.
So Vietnam was still a distant coming thing, and the U.S. was involved only as advisors.
Okay.
So I expected to spend my career in Germany facing the Russians.
Okay.
And I took German in college participating for that, but when I was commissioned, I went in with the 82nd Airborne, and then later, actually that year in 1965, they got the Marines and started building the Air Mobile Unit of the 1st Cavalry and all of those.
Okay.
Those guys got ready, and after my service in the Dominican Republic, because I was in the intervention of that, then I got orders to become an advisor in Vietnam. So but Vietnam really didn't figure into my going into the military originally.
Okay. Why the Army?
Well, my older brother was in the Army. I lived 10 minutes from the University of Texas at Arlington, even though that wasn't its name at the time, and they offered Army ROTC. So I was working my way through college, and I could afford it, and that was the service that to me had the most appeal.
Okay. Where was your initial training?
Well, in ROTC there, and then we got some training at Fort Sill, and then Fort Benning, Georgia. It was the infantry school.
Gotcha.
And I was commissioned in the infantry. So that's where I got my infantry and airborne training there.
Okay. Tell us about the airborne training. You jumped out of airplanes?
I jumped out of airplanes.
Have you ever done that before that?
I hadn't done it. I loved it.
Okay.
To me, it's the greatest feeling in the world. It's hard to describe to someone who hasn't done it, but when you jump out of that plane, there's a moment of silence, and you can see everything spread below you, and it's just a wonderful feeling. And also, it was an elite unit. That was something I wanted to be. I wanted to be a part of an airborne unit and an elite unit that was all volunteer.
Okay. How many jumps do you make before you're certified?
You make 5 jumps.
5 jumps, okay. All out of an airplane, or there?
All out of an airplane, and actually it was after I was gone through jump school that we test jumped the C-141, which was the first jet to be used, to my knowledge, the first big jet to be used to drop troopers. And actually, I went after my infantry training and airborne training. I went back to Vietnam, to the Dominican Republic,
Okay.
and then I jumped out of helicopters. It's just to keep my certification while we were down there.
Okay.
I had an interesting experience. I got sent to the Dominican Republic before I was legally qualified to go. It was a snafu, but I loved it because I talked my way down.
Right, right. Tell us about the Dominican Republic. What were you there for?
We
Something
were-
a lot of people don't know about.
Okay, we intervened. The Dominican Republic had a coup,
Okay.
and a bunch of what the government considered Castorites took over. And so all of the Organization of American States put together units and sent them down there to intervene and separate the rebelling, I'm going to use Castro supporters, from the government supporters. And we were part of that. We were a unit of the 82nd that went down and separated them out.
Okay.
And most of it was patrolling and dealing with riots and crowds like that,
Right.
things like that.
I guess there was a fear at the time that the revolution in Cuba would eventually spread.
Yeah, that was the key thing. Yeah, it was Castro was busy trying to create all kinds of mischief,
Right.
and we were the units that supported that.
Right. Was there any combat? What people would think of as combat?
Not really. I mean, there were times when we got shot at,
Right.
but we were under strict orders not to
Not shoot back.
unless we absolutely had to.
Right.
So,
And how long were you there?
well, let's see. The first time I was there 30 or 40 days, and I went back for training and then I went back down, and I was kind of one of the last ones of my unit, at least, to leave, because as a junior second lieutenant, I got stuck with handling all the complaints,
Right.
any complaints that the civilians had about us occupying or using any of their property.
Right.
I
And what
had-
year would that have been?
That would have been 1965, and yeah, I was out of there by the end of 65.
Okay. So tell us about Vietnam. When do you find out you're heading over there?
Well, I found out in, I guess, the probably late summer of 1966, and I went to school at Fort Bragg for advisors, called them MATA course, Military Assistance Training Advisor, I think was the title.
Okay.
But we were all trained there at Fort Bragg, the Special Warfare Center, to be advisors, what we would deal with, what we could expect, what our responsibilities would be,
Okay.
and a very short course in Vietnamese, what I call battlefield Vietnamese,
Okay.
which was interesting.
Right.
And then I ended up in Vietnam close to the end of October 1966.
Okay.
I was flown into Saigon. We got briefings there, and then those of us that were to be advisors in 4 Corps, which encompasses the Delta, and which there were no American troops.
Right.
All the American troops were north of that area. The Delta still is today, the Rice Bowl of South Vietnam. And so the Army of the Republic of South Vietnam, ARVN, or Army of the Republic of Vietnam, had responsibility for that area.
Okay.
And so some of us were selected out to be infantry battalion advisors, others to be advisors at the province or district level, etc. Those of us that were selected for 4 Corps were taken out and transported down. In my case, myself and another group were assigned to the 9th ARVN Division, so we flew into a place called Vinh Long.
Okay.
Jumped on a 2.5-ton truck, went over to Saigon, to Sa Dec, which was a province next to us, and which was the headquarters of the 9th ARVN. We reported in, and I remember I think it was a major, said, Lieutenant, he said, you are assigned to the 3rd Battalion, at that time called the 13th Regiment of the 9th ARVN. Later it was changed to the 16th Regiment, 13 was considered an unlucky number.
Right.
He said, your battalion is on an operation in the field. I want you to go drop your duffel bag over here, go out and get on that helicopter sitting on the helipad. You will be flown to your unit, which I did.
Okay.
The helicopter didn't land. It hovered over a rice paddy. It was kind of wet, rainy. It was in the moonshine season. I jumped off, and an American lieutenant comes running up and says, he says, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, my name's Latham." I said, "I've been assigned to this battalion." He said, "Great, you're my replacement. Your counterpart is over there." He gets on the helicopter and flies out. That was my briefing and introduction. I find my counterpart, who spoke, fortunately he had an interpreter with him,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Wait a minute, let me call the senior advisor," which was a captain. So he called the captain, and the captain said, "Welcome, you're going with this lieutenant who is the battalion XO. You'll stay with him during the operation." Right. And we're hunting VC. And so we stayed out for about 3 days, in which it rained almost every day. And one interesting fact, which I discovered, is that, and since I had no Vietnamese hammock or anything like that, I ended up sleeping in the mud. I got a fungal infection, which I had my entire tour, but which the medics later gave me a antibiotic or something that controlled it.
Right.
But you also get jock itch and everything because I wore cotton underwear.
Right.
It was the last time I wore underwear during my entire tour, except when I went to Saigon occasionally. Actually, I only went one time, and that was to escort my senior advisor's body back. So anyway, once we got out of the operation and went back into division headquarters, the captain took me out, and we went to the market, and I bought a Vietnamese hammock, which was a piece of nylon cloth with strong cords at the end, which rolled up into a ball about that big, and you wore it tied to the back of your harness, wrapped in a long piece of plastic. Some people used the poncho, but most of us that had any experience with it after a while used a long piece of light plastic, which you could buy there. And that kept it dry, and you wore it here because that's the only place besides the top of your head that you could keep dry in the Delta.
Okay.
And so you carried your wallet, your ID, any Vietnamese or U.S. script that you had, you carried it all in your helmet liner. Okay. Actually, I ended up, before my tour, buying a small Minox camera, little, what some people will laughingly call a spy camera.
Right.
And I carried that up there, because if you carried a camera anywhere else, it would get wet. But anyway, we got that, and that was my equipment for the rest of the time, as well as a pair of flip-flops, which you, once you were on an operation, once you settled down for the night, you would take your boots off, unless you were under fire. You'd take your boots off, have them by your side, put on the flip-flops, and hang your hammock between two. If you were light like I was, you could hang it between two banana trees and sleep about 3 inches off the ground. And so when the enemy fired, all you had to do was flip, and you were on the ground. But you didn't want to sleep on the ground if at all possible.
Right. Let me rewind just a little bit. So what are your initial thoughts when you land in Vietnam? You're in country, you just get there.
You're like, this is really different. The smells were a lot like Dominican Republic. It's the first time I had been in Asia. And it was kind of like, well, how am I going to get along with these guys? How am I going to have an impact?
Right.
What can I teach them? Because they've been fighting for years. Right. So what can I teach them? How can I be of assistance to them? And you quickly learn, fortunately, and this may sound odd, but one of the jobs I had when I was working through college was being a city bus driver in Fort Worth, Texas. And I always got stuck with, being a young guy working part-time, I always got stuck with the Saturday night bus routes from one bad end of town through town to the other bad end of town.
Okay.
Working that on a Saturday night, you learn to be a diplomat.
Gotcha.
Because you're dealing with people that get on the bus that are 3 sheets to the wind,
Right.
sometimes belligerent, and I'm a small guy. So I learned to deal with that, and so I used that same technique with the Vietnamese.
Right.
I listened to them, I watched, and when appropriate, I made advice.
Yeah.
But I would work it through my counterpart, and I tried not to do it in front of other troops, or do it quietly, and that generally worked. I stayed with the same battalion for 12 months, and I was one of the few officers that did that. A lot of guys would come in and spend 6 months, which you needed to do, to punch your ticket. Then they'd go find a desk job somewhere.
Right.
I stayed with the same battalion, went through 3 Vietnamese battalion commanders, 3 U.S. captains, and 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4, maybe more sergeants or enlisted guys. The team consisted of, supposedly, of a captain, a lieutenant, and 2 sergeants. We never were at full strength, except for very short periods of time. And I found the South Vietnamese to be very capable soldiers if well led, and very brave when well led. But they had some real commander problems. My first 2 Vietnamese battalion commanders were relieved. One because he was spent time at his house rather than with the battalion when we were attacked at night. My battalion was what was called a reserve force. We were the hunter-killer force for the battalion commander.
Okay.
If the VC struck over here, we would be taken over there to hit them and chase them down, and then pull back, wait for the next strike, and then go after them. Or if he got a tip that the VC were somewhere, we would be the ones sent in to find, fix, and kill. So that was primarily our job, and our operational area was primarily 3 to 4 provinces of Vietnam. Provinces of Vinh Binh, Bien Long, Sa Dec, and Kin Phong, which was on the Plain of Reeds. So we ranged from the sea, Vinh Binh, up to the Plain of Reeds in Kin Phong, and right across the Mekong. I spent a lot of time going across the Mekong. The 2nd Battalion commander deserted us in the middle of the biggest battle I was in. He literally got on a helicopter, rescue helicopter, and bugged out. Turned out to be the next to the best thing that happened all day, because I had a really good relationship with the Battalion XO, and so he listened to the battalion commander. Had already gotten me wounded once, and because of his incompetence and cowardness, and so I wasn't a fan of his anyway. But anyway,
battalion commander would be the rank of captain.
Yeah, he would be a captain.
Okay.
And then the guy that replaced him was actually North Vietnamese, Catholic, who had come south with his family when Vietnam was partitioned. And he was an outstanding soldier. Just a 44-year-old guy, honest, very, very capable, and he created a really good unit.
Right.
And I really enjoyed working with him. My first American boss or captain was killed on Easter Sunday, 26 March 1967, which was the biggest battle we were in. And that's one reason I ended up kind of running the show. The 2nd U.S. captain was wounded, and the 3rd one was still alive when I left, and I've talked to him since, and he made it through without a scratch.
What going into Vietnam, what were you told the mission of the United States was? Why were we there?
We
What did they tell you?
we were there to help the Vietnamese keep their freedom, the South Vietnamese, and keep the North from coming in. And I have to tell you, we really tried to do that. I have to get political a moment. Much of our strategy during that time was wrong. I think Westmoreland's tactics were wrong. I think we had too many U.S. troops in there. We should have had more of an advisory role working with the Vietnamese. And actually, a fellow named Rufus Phillips has written a book called Why Vietnam Matters that I think laid out the way we should. He was in Vietnam early and was frozen out of the Kennedy discussions.
Right.
But anyway, and then I think the Congress in the 70s, the Democrats just cut off all funding for the South Vietnamese. The North Vietnamese violated the Paris Peace Accords. We had promised to support the South Vietnamese if the North Vietnamese did. The North Vietnamese it was no longer a guerrilla war. They came in with tanks and everything, and they simply overwhelmed the South Vietnamese, who ran out of fuel, ammo, everything needed to defend. And so it was overrun. And I blame much of it on the Democratic Congress, period. Sorry, that's just, that's the facts. Yeah. But that was it. I will say I saw cowardness, and I saw a lot of bravery. I mentioned the 26 March battle. It has been written up in 4 books, at least a chapter. It's been the subject of several magazine articles, including one in the Smithsonian Air and Space. We had 3 choppers shot down. We had an incredible rescue organized on the spur to get 4 helicopters in and get the American crews out and some of the South Vietnamese wounded. That's my battalion commander got on one of the rescue helicopters. I watched him as he flew away.
I assume he was not wounded.
He was not wounded at all.
Okay.
He was just a coward, period. But his troops then fought very well. And we got reinforcements and we went into the wood line. We got landed in front of a Vietnamese strike force of 2 battalions had attacked one of our sister battalions that was guarding I won't go into the whole history, but they needed that battalion. Our Arvin battalion destroyed because they were at a strategic place. The battalion held them off. We were the 100 killer force that were being flown in to find the enemy, fix them until more folks could be in. They changed the LZ at the last minute. When they landed us, it was right in front of the enemy. They were dug in. They had Chinese 50 calibers, and they just shot the hell out of us.
Right.
One chopper went down. Medevac came in. He went down. The helicopter brigade commander, against all advice, said he was going in. He got shot down. So we had 3 choppers. We had 3 crews. Several members were dead. My senior advisor was killed rescuing helicopter crewmen. So I became the senior guy, and we organized an impromptu rescue where they brought in 4 helicopters. A smoke ship flew right in front of the BC. This guy was one of the most decorated pilots in Vietnam by the end of the war. He's now a Catholic priest. But he laid down smoke, and the rescue choppers got him out, and we pulled the helicopter gunships from all over the Delta, came in and supported us. We had F-100s come in, dropping napalm, you name it. They were pulling aircraft out to support us.
Tell me about your first time in combat, or actually somebody shooting at you. What's that experience like?
It's an experience of, wow, those guys are trying to kill me. But it's interesting enough, at least to me, your adrenaline flows, and it's like, I'm going to get those guys, and you're afraid before you go in maybe, once you're in, you're not afraid. Or at least I wasn't. I'm a Christian. I have a strong belief in God, and I can count 13 times that I should have been killed or seriously wounded. And I came out with one head wound and one John Kerry wound on the finger from a toe popper, little VC planted and popped up and got my finger. I shouldn't have got a Purple Heart for that, but somebody heard the transmissions when I was asked, "What, are you hurt?" And I said, "No, I just got a toe popper wound," and somebody decided I needed a Purple Heart. Right. But the head wound, that was another matter. They said another quarter inch, I wouldn't be having this conversation.
Can you tell me about that?
Sure. We had a armored APC unit, had a VC unit holed up in a wood line, and they couldn't get in because they were armored. So we were told to go in, so I landed with the first unit in, and the company commanders and I decided that we were going to go up and meet with the APC because we were landed one wood line away from them. So we started moving up, and when we were getting ready to assault the second, hold on just a second, sorry. I'll call him back. So when we were literally in the assault, the battalion commander landed and ordered everything to stop. And when he ordered us to stop, of course the VC were lobbing M79 and M60 mortar rounds at us, and when he stopped, and I turned to my counterpart to ask what was going on, they put a round right between us. And one went under my helmet and right there. The rest of it hit my helmet. It hit him in the back of the head, and all he had on was a beret. So he later recovered, but we both got evacuated out.
This is shrapnel.
It was shrapnel, yeah. But it hurt like a son of a gun. I mean, yeah, and I had blood all over my eyes and face, and so they weren't sure how bad I was hurt, so we called in medevac, and they got me and several other wounded out.
You talk about faith. Were you a Christian then?
Yes.
How did that play a role in how you survived mentally and spiritually while you were there in country?
Well, one, it kept me from engaging in sex, which was available if you wanted it. Right. That played a role. But secondly, it gave me what I call the courage or the confidence that I needed, because I kept seeing I'd have one time I had a booby trap. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term monkey bridge, but it's okay. A monkey bridge is over a canal, and the BC had wired grenades to the monkey bridge, which you couldn't see. Right. And when I started crossing one, I had one pop out, and it was right at my feet. And let me tell you, if you've ever seen synchronized swimming or diving, right. We saw it that time. I mean, it was grenade, and we all went into the canal. Right. But it didn't go off. I had another time when I was running, flanking we were down in a depression, and flanking a enemy unit, and they popped in, I still don't know if it was an M79 or mortar round, but anyway, they popped one right in that canal, and we went up on the bank. The enemy was shooting at us, but we were just flat right there. The thing went off, didn't hurt us. We jumped, we just rolled back into the ditch and went on. And there were several instances like that, and even the head wound. So I was convinced that God had his hand on me, and why I couldn't say. And certainly on Easter Sunday, one of the things I didn't mention is I came in on the second lift, not the first. So we were landed one wood line over in another rice paddy. So when we got to the wood line, I had a radio that didn't work, so I couldn't communicate with my captain, who was out in the rice paddy with the 3 helicopters. I couldn't get a clear understanding from my Vietnamese counterpart who was with me at the time what was going on. So I told the American sergeant, and he was talking to the battalion commander who was out hovering behind a little 6-inch dike like that. And the battalion commander kept telling him to come out into the rice paddy. And I said, well, that is absolutely idiotic. We need to flank, because there was cover over to our right that we could use. And he said, no, the captain wants us to come out. I said, okay, don't go out. You stay here. Sergeant, you stay with him. I will go out, and I will find out what's going on. So I did. And I made it all the way to the helicopters, which was more than 50 to 100 yards. And I timed my run with the helicopters coming over and shooting. Not a scratch. Other people, the helicopter crewmen, they were shot and wounded. Some of them very bad. That rescue got all of them out except one. We didn't know that at the time. And I found him later about midnight in the rice paddy, and he almost killed me. He had taken a rifle from one of the dead South Vietnamese soldiers, and they had spotted him and said, something's out there, we're not going out.
Right.
So I went out, went back from the wood line out into the rice paddy, and I said, Cove on me, and which means American advisor.
Right. And
then I said, I'm an American. And he said, oh. And anyway, he was really badly beat up. And we didn't know it at the time, but a spooky gunship, if you've ever heard that term, which is a DC-3 at that time with a Gatling gun, was flying cover for us for night. And a doctor had just decided to take a joyride on it. So he heard the transmission between myself and the upper headquarters, and he said, do you have any morphine? I said, we have none. I said, we've used everything we have on our wounded. He says, we will fly back if you can hold, if you guys can defend yourself. And I said, we can defend ourselves. The enemy's gone, except for a few stragglers who are shooting. He said, I'll fly back and get you morphine. So he did. He dropped it attached to flares. We shot John Meyer up with morphine, and then the deputy corps commander, or corps advisor, excuse me, was flying back with 2 gunships as escorts. And he heard us. He said, I'll come in and get this guy. Right. He got shot at, so he pulled up. One of the gunship pilots says, well, enough of that. We're going to get this guy out. So he flew in, and we bundled John up into a poncho with our M1 rifles and made a stretcher, and took him out to the gunship and put him on, and he was resurrected from the dead. But it's things like that convinced me that God was real. In fact, we just 2 years ago we had the 50th anniversary battle, a reunion of that.
So, as you know, the Vietnam War was not popular here in the States. While you're there, do you know what's going on in the United States as far as protesting and how the war is not well received here? Did you know any of that?
Not till I got back. Okay. I mean, I'm with a Vietnamese unit. I don't have time to listen to Armed Forces radio, I ate a lot of chicken, rice, shrimp, and rice for a year. In fact, you couldn't give me a bowl of rice for about 2 years. So no, I did not know. It became evident when I came back, and after a tour in Thailand, I got out of the Army in '69 and to get a master's degree, and decided I wanted to do something else, and that's another story I did. But I when I was at the University of Texas at Austin getting my graduate degree, that's a conservative university, but I really saw how unpopular the were. And I saw how ignorant, stupid, and closed mind the anti-left movement was. And quite frankly, because I could hear them, and they knew nothing about Vietnam. They knew nothing about the real history, and that bothered me a lot.
Are you spending most of your time predominantly in the field, or are you going out doing a mission and then coming back?
Well, let me put it this way, both. But coming back was a rice paddy outside of town where we had to build our own camp. So I was not, like, we considered heaven going into a provincial or division headquarters for a day or so. That's where you got to sleep in a bunk. You had a shower instead of the local canal. You got to get an American version of food from one of their mess halls, or at least really well cooked Vietnamese food, because when you were with your troops, you were eating a lot of rice, a lot of shrimp, or prawns, maybe some chickens that you bought. And I picked up a idea from my first senior advisor. He had his family ship over cases of tomato soup, condensed tomato soup. We would take the tomato soup and put it in with the rice, and it would add some flavoring. And it was kind of thing where you first get there and they give you a bowl of rice when you first start your tour as an advisor, and you see these bugs crawling around, and you think, I don't know about this. Within a couple of weeks or a month or so, it's like, okay, that's more protein, and it doesn't bother you anymore. So even, what I'm saying is, even our rest periods were not luxurious.
Right, so you're pretty much in the field the entire time.
Pretty much in the field.
And how many tours did you do?
I just did one.
One tour, and that's a year?
I did a tour a year. I came back, I trained people for Vietnam for a year, and then I went to Thailand and trained the Thais for Vietnam. And at that time, Nixon let us resign if you wanted to. I resigned, got a graduate degree, and then got hired by a 3-letter agency and spent my career with them.
Were you able to communicate back home?
Yes, I wrote letters.
Okay.
That was the old thing, but that was the only way.
Right. Was there any downtime at all?
Yeah, there'd be days. There'd be days where you relax for a day or so, waiting for the next order or the next operation, whatever. So yeah, you could write letters. You could get letters that would come in. They'll go into the division. They would hold them for you, and when you came by, they would give them to you.
Was there anything you guys did for recreation, or was that not even an option?
It wasn't an option. It wasn't an option for us.
Right.
In fact, I've connected with some of the folks that were I belong to an organization called Counterpart, which is made up of former advisors. And one of the guys there served in division headquarters, and so he has pictures of how they lived in division headquarters, and where the USO groups would come in. And so he's got pictures of James Gardner and Efrelin Zimbalist Jr. and Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, and it's like, I never saw those folks.
Right.
But no, that was not really an option for us.
Right. Now you were an advisor.
Right.
What does that mean?
Well,
you saw combat, so you're more than just an advisor. You're more than just giving advice.
Well, a lot of it was getting helicopter support, gunships particularly, coordinating with the slicks, but also discreetly advising the Vietnamese on tactics and how to deal with the Vietnamese. But you had to be very careful because they were proud.
Right.
And if you didn't do it right, they would ignore you. In fact, I mentioned this North Vietnamese officer that came in. He was a major. Well, for about a month or two, I was his advisor, because there was took that long to get an American captain to replace the one that was killed. And he was very understanding. I mean, we worked out a detail, because he'd been fighting his entire life.
Right.
And we worked out a way that I could advise, and he listened, but it was all diplomatic.
Yeah.
You know, it's not, you got to do this. It was, you know, it was Chiyotai as major said, you know, I know you've been doing this long. May I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
And we do it this way. Yeah, I like that. Or he would look at it and say, no, I don't think so. I said, okay, why not? He'd say, well, because. I said, okay, that makes sense. So we worked out that way. So
as long as you did it tactfully, they were receptive to advice.
Yeah, yeah. And
now, how many Americans were with you?
no more than 3 other Americans. Most of the time it was just 2.
Okay.
A captain and an enlisted man of some rank. We had from sergeant first class to corporal. I think was the last one.
Tell us about your homecoming.
Well, I landed at Travis Air Force Base, took a bus to San Francisco International, flew from there to Dallas, and Texas was very friendly. California, not so much, and I don't want to talk about that. But I will say this, I was flying on American Airlines in uniform. This was, again, 67.
Right.
And one of the stewardesses came and said, "Where are you coming?" I said, "Vietnam." And she hugged me and called over another stewardess, and they hugged me. American Airlines had a customer for many years
Right.
because of that. Just a simple act.
And how long did you stay in the Army after you got back?
Well, I was in the Army a total of a little over 4 years,
Right.
from 65 to 69. And I decided that, it sounds really strange, I liked combat. It's almost like a narcotic. I didn't like stateside Army.
Right.
It was just thing. And I could also see some of the strains on a family caused by the stateside, by the Army.
Right.
And I was a bachelor. I wanted to get married, and it was very clear that I wasn't going to stay in one place long enough to meet a woman to get married.
Right.
So I made a decision to go to graduate school thinking I would teach. I saw that the university atmosphere was very much like, if you're a Vietnam veteran, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
So in my case, the CIA, when I was getting ready to finish my master's, deciding I wasn't going to get a PhD, because that was my original plan, one of my advisors was an old World War II Navy guy, and he says, "I know a guy that would be very interested in talking to you," because I was thinking about going back into the Army. And so I met this guy, and he said, "I'm from the CIA, and we need people like you, and would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah." So I joined the CIA as an operations officer and was undercover until I retired, and they rolled my cover back. So I can tell you where I worked. And that was a good fit for me.
Right. You look back on it. How did your experience in Vietnam affect your life? Now that you have a chance to look back and reflect 50 years later.
Well, to me, it was an experience that I would not trade. I don't know that I would have anybody else go through it, but I see a whole generation of going through it in Iraq and Afghanistan. My son-in-law has gone through it in Afghanistan. And I think they have a much tougher job than we did. because they're facing IEDs.
Right.
And we had booby traps, but none like those. So I'm proud of what I did. I learned a lot of lessons, and I've used those lessons every day, both in leadership and other. The Army taught me to be a leader, and I've used those lessons that I learned in the Army throughout my CIA career. They also taught me to be ethical,
Right.
and I use those too.
Our mission here at the museum is to capture stories of Americans in wartime like yourself, preserve those stories for people to watch these and learn 50 or 100 years down the road. You want to send a message to somebody that might watch this video when we're all gone, 50 years down the road, 100 years down the road?
Yeah, I can't tell you how to spend your life. I can tell you, in my experience, there is a God. He does watch over us. But the other thing is, even if you don't believe that, take the honorable, the ethical path and do the right thing always. There's too much garbage going on in today's world. But a person who is upright and follows the 10 Commandments is going to do well. You'll face a lot of problems, but you'll do well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to talk about we skipped over? Or?
No, that's it. Other people have asked me about humorous incidents, and there were some really funny things that happened in Vietnam. But I did see, and I have some, if you will, combat brothers that we're as close as we can be, even though we only met a couple of times.
Right.
Initially.
Right.
Some of us we only met once on a battlefield, but those battle bonds last forever. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir, for your service. Thank you for sitting down and talking to us, and I want to welcome you home.
Well, thank
on
you.
behalf of the Americans in Wartime Museum. I also want to give you a challenge coin, just a small token of our gratitude for sitting down and talking to us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome.